Hello. This is a part four. This is a part four episode of a response series, a response to an article made by an author named Caelliox that runs the entirety of Socialism 101. I recommend you watch the first three parts before you watch this one. So that way you can get the entirety of the context at hand, and so that way you can be able to move forth on move forth onto your understanding of what this series is about. So if you haven't watched the previous three parts, I recommend you watch it. The playlist will most likely be on the top right there. But without further ado, let's get started about Caelliox. He raises the question of degeneration, and I guess for now, you can say that I would be here to answer that. He proceeds to try and downplay the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union, and worst of all, tries to say that we consider the Soviet Union bureaucratic just because of socialism in one country. Of course, the theory of socialism in one country is a degeneration to Marxism and Leninism, but not exactly the bureaucratic structures. What we do criticize of the bureaucracy is the massive suppression of Soviets, the abolition of the proletarian militia and the institution of the standing army and police force, the disregarding of the population's vote for the Bolshevik Leninists, suppression of criticism, suppression of collective organizing, and lack of basic human rights and freedoms to the population. What Leon Trotsky criticizes socialism in one country for is its revisionism and deviation from Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and trying to downplay the importance of the international outlook to the sheer power capitalism has, which is very much correct and is cleared up even by Leon Trotsky and his followers as well themselves. Anyways, let's see what he has to say. One of the main points raised by Trotsky is party degeneration, and while we hold that this point raises some fair concerns, which I will get to later, it fails at what it tries to do. Firstly, how exactly does building socialism in one country increase the chances of party degeneration? Trotsky does not give an answer to this question. Yes, he fucking does, but whatever. How exactly would an isolated dictatorship of the proletariat be any different? If anything, I see the preservation of capitalist relations as a more dangerous in this front than the building of socialism, because of its revisionism to Marx, Engels, and Lenin, as we had pointed out beforehand, and the increasing theory that has been made during this time by Joseph Stalin and his bureaucrats, misrepresenting what Vladimir Lenin meant entirely. As well, the fact socialism in one country was not just the thing that made it bureaucratic, rather the form of problems, as I mentioned beforehand. Also, for your question, if you had read Revolution Betrayed, which you possibly didn't, since you're seriously asking this question, Leon Trotsky says that this forms of bureaucracy was unavoidable due to the material conditions. So I would say this would be more of a question to Hale Draper or Chris Harman and a lot of neo-Trotskyists such as I, to answer your question, would be for the fact that we are to reject stagism completely and see that capitalism is a specific social relation, and that we can give power to the workers at all fronts during this time and leave it to the power of them in the democratic structures, not trying to militarize them or advocate for a party takeover of Soviets when the workers' state is established. That is for the international level of our job to establish worker states beyond our borders, not when the transformation is already established. The truth is, the Soviet Union could have saved itself, and time and time again. If they had just left power to the Soviets themselves and the workers, rather than trying to privatize the system when production and distribution rates going up anyways, the only way where you can defend the degeneration of the Soviet Union is if the countries wanted a profit and to try and have a competition with other bourgeois nations, which if so, then you'll be telling the truth, which is exactly what made them no different than the United States or the United Kingdom. He proceeds to quote the preface of a contribution to the Critique of Political Economy by Karl Marx, and here's basically what he quotes. In the social production of their existence, men inevitably enter into the divine relations which are independent of their will, namely the relations of production, appropriate and given stage in the development of their material forces of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, the real foundation on which arises a legal and political superstructure, and to which corrected definite forms of social consciousness. The mode of production of material life conditions in the general process of social and political intellectual life. It is not unto the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. At a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into the conflict with the existing relations of production, or this merely expresses the same thing in legal terms, with the property relations within the framework of which they have operated hitherto, from forms of development of the productive forces. These relations turn into their fetters. Then begins the era of social revolution. The changes of the economic foundation led sooner into the latter due to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure. Karl Marx, a contribution to the critique of political economy. At first, I didn't know why he would post this, but then he says this. Clearly, political power cannot exist over the economy for very long, for economical power is necessary to hold the political power in the first place. The proletariat needs to revolutionize all productive forces, social relations, that correspond with the productive relations, and finally, class distinctions on which they rest. What is in the eyes of Trotskyists an isolated dictatorship of the proletariat to do? Now it all makes sense. Caelliox, the one thing that every Marxist needs to understand, the dictatorship of the proletariat is the revolution itself. The transition that people refer to is not a society. It is a transition from one society to another, or in other words, a transformation. Not only that, but this transformation is supposed to mean that it has a quick and decisive blow to capitalism, and a new society to be found from the old one. What the workers' state to do was just to leave it to the workers and stuck to the original plan when the revolutions in Europe started going downhill. Use the Third International to build up the working class, and but that was negated because of the bureaucratic takeover in 1925. That was the importance to understand. So you shouldn't ask the Trotskyists. You should ask yourself and ask the Stalinists what could have been done. Even then, you're missing the fucking point, Caelliox, of our criticism. This is like what I said in defense of Trotskyism series. The point is not to ask what could have happened. Alternate history is a fucking idealist way of arguing, and it's just made up of however you like into your mind. That's not what we should do. This is history. The question is not of what ought to be, or the question is what could have happened. The question is what did happen, and not what could have been done. That should be this entire idea of what could have happened should be an entire different section. He proceeds to take Frederick Engels out of context in his letter to Caelliox, quoting this section from his letter. I think we today can advance only rather the ideal hypotheses. One thing alone is certain. The victorious proletariat can force no blessings of any kind upon any foreign nations without undetermining its own victory by so doing. Now, here's the actual full context of what he's saying to Caelliox in his letter. In my opinion, the colonies proper, i.e. the countries occupied by the European population, Canada, the Cape, Australia, and all become independent. On the other hand, the countries inhabited by a native population, which are simply subjugated, India, Algiers, the Dutch, Portuguese, and the Spanish possessions, must be taken over time, being the proletariat, and led as rapidly as possible towards independence. Now, this process will develop. It is difficult to say. India will perhaps, indeed, very probably produce a revolution, and as the proletariat in emancipating itself, cannot conduct any colonial wars, and this would have and this would have to be given a full scope. It would not pass off without all sorts of destruction, of course, but that sort of thing is inseparable from all revolutions. The same might also take place elsewhere, ergo in Algiers and Egypt, and would certainly be the best thing for us. We shall have enough to do at home. Once Europe is reorganized in North America, that will furnish the colossal power and such an example that semi-civilized countries will follow the wake of their own accord. Economic needs alone will be responsible for this, but as what the social and political phases of these countries will have to pass through before they likewise arrive at the socialist organization. We today can only advance rather ideal hypotheses. I think one thing alone is certain: the victorious the proletariat can force no blessings of any kind upon any foreign nation without undermining its own victory by doing so, which of course by no means excludes the defensive wars of various kinds. Frederick Engels. Engels to Caelliox. Note the fact that he said that once the revolution has taken forms more than just in one country, but in the countries of the developed world, and then the underdeveloped countries, what would be considered now as the developing countries now. As well as he even says that the victory of the proletariat would then be established completely once it has made its revolution to the point where capitalists have to surrender, and that this will start in one country but still need to be quick for full liberation. This entire quote is very much suggesting the opposite, that socialism in one country can lead to an actual worker state and be considered socialist in that time as well, or ever in any regard. As I try to say to everyone, economics is inherently international, and our revolution would have to be international because of it, to fully negate the economic system. This is pointed by Frederick Engels in the 19th question from Principles of Communism, which I've already quoted enough. The only thing I can really say is that this was even said by Marx to Engels of what Engels should respond Kautsky with. There is no denying that bourgeois society has for the second time experienced the 16th century. A 16th century which I hope will sound its death knell just as the first use heard into the world. The proper task of the bourgeois society in the creation of the world market, at least in the outline of the production based on that world market. Since the world is round, and the consolation of California and Australia and opening up of China and Japan would seem to have completed this process. For us, the different question of this and the continent revolution is imminent. Will moreover instantly assume a socialist character. Will it not necessarily be crushed in this little corner of the earth, since the movement of the bourgeois society is still on the ascendant over a far greater area? Karl Marx. Marx to Engels in Manchester. Economics are international. Period. Finally, did the building of socialism in the USSR lead to the party degeneration? No, it did not. When the Soviet Union entered the historical epoch of socialism, the party was more proletarian than it was in the time of Lenin. In 1929, Molotov had outlined Stalin's Politburo's plan to proletarianize the party, so that by 1930, at least 50% of the party were industrial workers. This goal was achieved. In 1930, the party had consisted of 65% manual workers, 20% peasants, and only 14% white-collar officials. The party was more proletarian in composition in 1930 than in Lenin's time. Okay, a lot to cover here. First off, you say that the USSR was building socialism and then said it had already entered at the same time. Caelliox, everybody. Oh my fucking god. How the hell are you gonna build socialism and then say it entered socialism at the same time? Caelliox, everybody. Listen, you can't build socialism and then enter into socialism at the same time. They aren't the same. Suggesting as so would make the building part useless. Second, that claim that the Bolshevik Party was not as proletarian it was in 1929 or 1930 is completely false. The Bolshevik Party was joined by the masses during the Russian Revolution and grew as the revolution continued. By 1915, 56% of members of the Bolshevik Party were proletarian. By 1917, that grew to 73%. By 1919, 94% of party members in the Bolshevik Party were proletarian. How can you proletarianize a party that is under the control of the proletariat? Unless you retain the common Stalinist belief that an intelligentsia leads the workers as a definition of the vanguard, then to that I would say no to that. And listen, there is no intelligentsia to begin with. There is an advanced conscious proletariat that educates the proletariat into class consciousness and political consciousness of their world. Once this happens, then the rest of the proletariat would become educated and thus negate the role of the advanced proletariat, and they would just be proletarians. Because how can you educate the workers what they already know because you educated them? The simple answer is you can't. Thus, the vanguard now would be under the control of the proletariat democratically and organized based on their own means and their own elected leadership as proletarians for the revolution and what needs to be done. Centralized yet democratic to fight against the bourgeoisie, which is a centralized force. Thus, this can really be described as the party of the proletariat. That is the truth of the vanguard and its meaning. The first questions to arise are: how is this discipline of the proletariat's revolutionary party maintained? How is it tested? How is it reinforced? First, by the class conscience of the proletarian vanguard, and by the devotion of the revolution, by its tendency, self-sacrifice, and heroism. Second, by its ability to link up, maintain the closest contact, and, if you wish, merge in certain measure of the broadest masses of the working people, primarily with the proletariat, but also with the non-proletarians, masses of working people. Third, by the correctness of the political leadership exercised by this vanguard, and by the correctness of political strategy and the tactics provided by the broad masses, have seen from their own experience on what they are correct. Without these conditions, discipline of the revolutionary party really capable of being the party of the proletariat, whose mission is to overthrow the bourgeoisie and transform the whole of society, cannot be achieved. Without these conditions, all attempts of the established discipline inevitably fall flat and to end up to the phrase of the mongering and clowning. On the other hand, these conditions cannot emerge at once. They are created only by the prolonged effort of a hard-won experience. Their creation is facilitated by a correct revolutionary theory, which, in its turn, is not a dogma, but assumes the final shape only in the close connection with the practical activity of a truly mass and truly revolutionary movement. Vladimir Lenin, Left-Wing Communism, an Infantile Disorder. Thirdly, if anything, the party had to become more and more bourgeois because of the increase in commodity production and trying to get a profit into those commodities, which then they could pay for the maintenance of the means of production and pay their workers a wage that cuts the amount of actual labor time performed into the workday. This was leased and instituted from the bureaucracy in the Soviet Union that brought all power to the Central Committee that workers did not have a say or vote in. This number only increased. By 1929, it was 34%. 1930, 89% of members of the Central Committee owned production. By 1932, it had gone beyond the fucking membership of the Central Committee. It literally went beyond the membership of the Central Committee by this time. It was over fucking 100%. This was bourgeois, unless if you are to say that the proletariat are people who buy labor power and the bourgeois are the ones who sell their labor power, then fine. But that just gives them different names of the same social relation. The only difference between them was now that they had a planned economy, but that means jack shit if they're using it to exchange commodities in the first place, thus facilitating a market as an abstract form. Can we call this a degeneration? No. We cannot. In fact, I hold that the Bolshevik Party never degenerated in the classical sense of the word. Rather, it was usurped by the bourgeoisie, who have sneaked into the party. Following World War II, the Bolshevik Party had lost millions of members. This led to many new members joining basically overnight, as many party function lacked manpower. But these people had no revolutionary spirit of the old Bolsheviks. They had petty bourgeois mentality of the simple being of general staff, while being disconnected from the masses and consequently reality. As if this is supposed to mean anything. I might as well quote myself. I might as well quote myself in this video what I said in response about the Second Imperialist War. The only way you can say this was the case is if you jump forward in time to talk about the involvement of the Soviet Union in the Second Imperialist War, which in all regards it was not by any means a workers' revolution. By 1932, the Soviet Union had used the private property they were to reinstitute and order workers to work in those lands, which they would produce goods and resources, and then start selling them into the world market in 1932, and then getting profit from what they sold, then having to make calculations to pay workers' wages into the country, thus acting as a means of institution owning others, means of production, and getting profit from it, which they cut the amount of labor time performed into the workday to pay the worker the wage, so they can keep production going and pay for materials. Especially since the fact that this land by 1932 was not even under the control of the state. It was leased and handed out to bureaucrats and officials who now owned production. They exchanged this almost all over the world, especially in Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, the United States, France, Turkey, Spain, and Romania. When the Germans offered to have both of them invade Poland, they did so because it was profitable and they could gain factories, resources, and most importantly, capital from the invasion, and alongside with the German armies into the west. They invaded from the east and basically took eastern Poland with merely 140 casualties out of the 700,000 that invaded into for the Polish armies had moved more of their troops in the west to fight the Germans, not seeing the Russian invasion. This is by far an example for state capitalism. I plan on making more arguments and making a separate video about state capitalism and what that means and why the USSR was that. But this, as I provided, is one of the main points of why the USSR was state capitalist and degenerated even further. Now, let's enter World War II into the equation completely. Fast forward, more purging of the old Bolsheviks, the assassination of Leon Trotsky, and the failed infiltration into the Fourth International and the International Communist Current. The Soviet Union was invaded by the Nazis, and their exchange in the United States and the United Kingdom was about to pay off, because now they got more support from capitalist nations against another capitalist nation, which they themselves, as we demonstrated, had generalized commodity production and facilitated the same social relation as capitalism. Fast forward again, Nazi Germany gets help from Finland, then they try to take the Caucasus, Stalingrad happened, and now the tides have turned for Germany. So the Soviet Union marched further west and had reached to Berlin. After fighting a really hard battle, Berlin fell and the Nazi regime was officially destroyed. Before the Battle of Berlin, though, there was already an agreement of territory and spheres of influence people would have in all of Europe. This is where Caelliox can only objectively say that there had been a secure revolution in Europe. But here's some problems with that logic. It's not our job to make worker states. The worker states are made up of the working class and are instituted by the means of revolution, not making a puppet state of formerly occupied territory from a treaty to decide the fate of an imperialist war. We are revolutionaries, not warmongers. By 1950, the party was filled with such people. It's lost its revolutionary spirit and energy. Stalin and the Politburo recognized this, and various attempts at change took place. For example, Stalin proposed the entire Politburo to resign and let new blood flow in. Ah, okay. So Stalin didn't want to share the capital. Damn, dude. Actually, no. This is Joseph Stalin we're talking about. Go figure. No one. Of course, he's not gonna want to share the fucking capital. However, as Stalin died and the old Politburo got forcefully removed from power, these plans never came to be. Why did the coup happen? How do we prevent revisionism and capitalist restoration in socialist countries? That will be the main topic of our next article, revisionism. What is it and how to fight it? You should write one about yourself. Well, at least he's going to be busy with dealing with dumbasses now that are pretty much not that different, except that they're more of the same thing that had been instituted in 1923 and 28, except they weren't afraid to call it market exchange. All right, we're in the conclusion. That's the end of the article. So let's get to the conclusion. This was very much a tough article to get through, and very much a one that definitely deserves a response. Now, let's break down what we learned. Socialism in one country is a theory that you can have socialism in one country and that it believes socialism is merely just a worker's ownership of the means of production and thus can exist in one country because of it. But it also believes if the workers don't own the means of production, it's still socialist because they control the state. This theory is completely wrong and goes against what Marx, Engels, and Lenin says, and was something that Trotsky had tried to point out to the Bolsheviks and gave actual arguments. Yet the quote-unquote Marxist and quote-unquote Leninist faction still retained the theory that was not Marxist or Leninist to begin with. The truth is, the idea for a workers' ownership of the means of production is really simplified way of talking about the dictatorship of the proletariat, i.e. the workers' state. But even then, it's a transformation from capitalism to socialism and would only be considered socialist as of a tendency. But we describe things based on its economic activity the most. The new economic policy is very much misunderstood by the left today. It was not state capitalist, as we know state capitalism on its economics, nor was it socialist. The new economic policy was to explain the material conditions of the workers' state and seeing the failures of the workers' revolutions in Europe and Asia, thus the only ones left being in North and South America. It still had better workers in their power and gave the start of the economics of the workers' state that was talked about from Karl Marx in Capital Volume 1, Chapter 32. But this would very much lose power to the workers in 1925 and fully negate power to the workers in 1928. Sorry, but this would very much lose power to the workers in 1925 and would fully negate power to the workers in 1928. Permanent evolution is the best explanation and the only coherent and consistent analysis about the conditions of the economics around us. When we look at the world and what must be done to get to our goals for us, and for us to be able to get to socialism is to make the revolution permanent and international until capitalism is defeated. This is our revolution, and that is what has to be done. And the methods of that dictatorship of the proletariat means that will do, or else it would be crushed. The bureaucracy of the Soviet Union is unrefusable and very much laid the foundations of the further degeneration to happen within the country that would no longer even constitute it a workers' state. It had facilitated the same social relations and the same exact problems of every other capitalist nation. They were just afraid to own up to it until Khrushchev pushed it even further and was not afraid to call it what it was. As well, since the fact that we pointed out they had suppressed freedom of speech, they had took over the government by bureaucratic means, literally disregarding the popular opinion. They instituted a police and standing army, they had stopped power to the Soviets, they had restricted elections, and they gave more and more leisure to the state rather than the workers. This is bureaucratic and could have been avoided, which is not even the point because it happened anyways. We also see that the author, Caelliox, is willing to take people out of context and misquote them, as well as provide quotes that its legitimacy being unknown. as well as the speculation for the fact that Caelliox may very well know these criticisms and may have been said or true, but still in denial because of the outside force, or he is actually in ignorance. And to that, I would say, read the theory you pretend to read. Either way, it is fair to say that Caelliox is very much wrong and is misleading here, which is ironic for he runs an education project called Socialism 101, yet he needs one-on-one basics of socialism and what that means. Hopefully this video series was able to give you an outlook of socialism in one country, and I really hope you very much learned something while watching this series. This video, although an official response to Caelliox, is very much implied and used in arguments from various Stalinist and Maoist YouTuber trends of opportunism and revisionism on YouTube here as well, such as Leftism Today, Danky Kang, Haikim, Paul Moran, Bay Area ML. Although, since we're talking about Bay Area ML, he deserves an entirely separate video for just his shilling for the Chinese government and their ideology. Anyways, as well as fellow traveler, the Finnish Bolshevik Jason Unruh, and other really misguided Stalinists and Maoists. This video can also possibly be used for people who believe that state capitalism is the mode of production of the dictatorship of the proletariat, like the Borghese side of the split between Damon and Bordiga in the Italian left communist split. As well as this video may be used for people who are too critical of the NEP, such as Council Communists and Marxist Humanists. As well, this goes into the detail of the anarchists who think that the Soviet Union degenerated after a month, which is obviously just not fucking true, seeing the entirety of the politics of the actual Soviet system and the actual differences and what had actually changed. Hopefully this helps out with all the understandings and gives you a better insight of the Soviet Union and its degeneration and its importance to understand, as well as just address some misconceptions of politics like Vicky's recent video, although they are pretty minor. As Karl Marx famously said, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. Karl Marx, Thesis on Feuerbach. Thank you for watching this series. If you liked it, hit the like button on the videos. So that way we can spread it and we can try and get more stuff done together. If you are new to my channel, hit that subscribe button to get me more of a following and more of these messages and videos, so we can keep going. So we can educate more people. Share this series with people in order to help them and possibly for them to learn something new about topics. Also, I have a Discord server now where you can join and say hi, and we could make a community to better understand neo-Trotskyism and what that means, or to just dunk on some state capitalists. You can follow me on Twitter, and you can keep updated on my ideas and what I am doing, as well as seeing my online activity. If you'd like to know me better. And with that, I say goodbye. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Socialist Links is out.